Continuing Chapter 9, Chickadee Survival. Not everyone understood that, least of all the two scoutmasters who led the troop we had joined on its first winter campout. We learned in less than a year that the scouts did not have much to teach us about nature or survival that Stalking Wolf or the Boy Scout Handbook had not already taught us. Still, being scouts gave us a chance to get into the new woods in the South, and that campout in December was a fantastic opportunity. We were up and out in the woods hours before the early risers. We hadn't been in Scouts very long, and we had no regard for the discipline necessary to keep 25 kids from getting lost, killed, or injured. We didn't need anyone to protect us from the woods. The idea was as crazy as hiding from storms. So we got up early and went wherever there might be something of interest. We knew the storm was coming hours before anyone else did, and we knew it was going to be a great one to watch. When it started to gather on the western edge of the sky, we started to look around for a place to weather the storm and watch it. But we knew we'd be in trouble if we did. Our parents had warned us repeatedly about wandering off and making everybody worry about us, and we decided to go back nearer to camp. We consoled ourselves with the idea that perhaps one of the scoutmasters might know something about storms that we didn't. The scoutmaster was a very well-meaning man, but even when he stood up, he seemed to be sitting behind a desk. It did not seem likely that he would know something about the wilderness that we did not, but we were willing to learn from anybody, and we had found that often the most unlikely people give us information that's invaluable. Hold on one moment, I have to do something with the cats here, hold on. I had learned a lot from the old Pineys, and I have learned even more about deer from an old man who lived in the woods and fed hundreds of them every day. He could name more than 100 deer by sight, and they would come up and eat out of his hand, although they would not even come close to me. Rick and I walked back through the woods, watching the clouds come in, dark gray with a brownish gray above, trailing long wisps of snow. Before we were 15 minutes on the trail back, everything was covered in snow. We stopped on a rise about halfway along and looked back over the trail we had come up. The clouds hovered over the little valley behind us like a low roof, and the snow fell out of the clouds in one dense and continual stream, so that there seemed to be a direct connection between the forest and the sky. The curtain that hung there would eventually move, and when it did, going back towards camp would be futile. Obviously, we would have to curl up when it overtook us. We could not travel too hard because if we began to sweat heavily, we would not be able to lie down and let the snow cover us up if the going got bad. Still, we had no sense of being in danger. If worse came to worse, we could wait a little and dig into a snowbank. We were safe enough wherever we were. We could, if we gave it a little time, break enough pine branches in a few minutes to make a brush lean-to. Pine needles would keep a small fire going for the duration of the storm if we wanted luxury. Well, the storm caught up with us before we got back to camp. A white veil of fine, small grains kept falling and transforming everything. We wandered around, mesmerized, watching it fall. We moved so erratically that it would have been hard to say when we were simply making side trips after something unusual and when we were lost. We spent too much time backtracking ourselves, and we did not get back until late in the day. But we were having a good time, and although the walking had gotten noticeably harder, we were moving through the woods like chickadees flying for the sheer joy of it. Watching the storm from the luxury of lean-tos with the bunks opening into the wind was going to be a treat, and to some extent we look forward to watching the storm in that kind of comfort, even if it did insulate us a bit from the true nature of the storm. You have to be in the storm to understand the sense of awe that fills the chickadee with joy. If watching from inside seemed like it was costing us the full experience of the storm, we could always go outside again. We wondered if we would be able to talk somebody out of giving up one of their front bunks at the open face of the lean-to. Because we were new and they did not know our abilities, or because we were the youngest, they had put us in bunks at the low end of the sloping lean-to, closed off from the weather on all three sides. Rick didn't think we would get anyone to voluntarily give up a bunk with such a great view for one that was all closed in like ours, but we reminded each other that we could always go back outside if we wanted. What happened when we got back was incomprehensible to us. The scoutmaster came towards us, moaning and wringing his hand. "Oh gosh, you're back," he said. "We thought you were already dead." I looked at Rick to see if he understood what the man was moaning about between his chattering teeth, but Rick couldn't understand him either. "Who's dead?" we said. I noticed for the first time that the man's lips were blue and his face was wind-beaten. He looked as if he had been left laying on his face in the snow for an hour. His hands came out from under his armpits for the first time. We saw him and went waving around in the air like lunatics. "We're dead," he shouted. If he had not been an adult, I would have thought he was on the ragged edge of panic, but we had been having so much fun that it took me a minute to realize he was serious. "I can't get a fire going," he moaned, "and the wind is blowing. It's a blizzard." He sounded as if woe after woe had been piled upon him until he had begun to break. "We can't get the cars out." He looked at us as if we were on the witness stand. "We only waited an hour, and we couldn't get them out. We're going to die here if we don't get some help." He shouted at us as if we were too stupid to grasp the enormity of our situation. Then he began to look at us as if there were something odd about us he could not quite put his finger on. He went around us like a mother bird whose eggs have been disturbed. It was obvious we weren't particularly cold, and we'd been gone a long time in the storm, and we didn't look any worse for wear. The fact that we were warm, calm, and reasonable was probably what made him listen to us. That, and the fact he was desperate. "Well, do you want us to walk to town?" we said. His hands went waving around again. No, it's 12 miles or more." Actually, it was only 7 in a straight line, and we had walked further than that coming home from Good Medicine Cabin sometimes. If we had known the true distance, we might have walked it. Instead, we offered to do it when the storm settled. "We can't wait till the storm's over," he said. "We need help now." He said it with the frenzy of a man who has forgotten to inform anybody about exactly where in the huge preserve he's going to be camped, and who doesn't expect help for days at best. We looked into the lean-tos. They were open-faced, garage-type affairs with a roof that sloped down towards the back. Each had 10 army spring cots and metal frames. All 3 were filled with boys huddled in their sleeping bags, crying or shivering, or curled up quietly waiting to die. I could not believe it. They had gotten the official word that they were going to die, and they had begun to prepare themselves in whatever way they could. But they had done nothing to survive. Even if they had all gotten together and huddled in one pile in the corner of one of the lean-tos, they would have had a much better chance of surviving. If they had given the extra sleeping bags to the outer layer of the pile, they would have kept warm that way. We told the scoutmaster that we had been out in the woods in the snow lots of times before, and we could make a fire if he and the assistant scoutmaster could close off the front of the middle lean-to. Once he saw a direction, the scoutmaster calmed down and got all the scouts into the middle lean-to and laid picnic tables up against the front of the lean-to, leaving space for us to make the fire. By canting the tables out, we could use them as a reflector that would throw the heat back into the lean-to. Rick and I started our fire the way we always did, with cedar shavings and ground-up pine needles. We chose for who would make the one to be the windscreen, and I lost. Making the windscreen entailed opening your jacket like a pair of wings and settling down over the tinder like a bird roosting. If you did not back up quick enough, once the tinder caught, you got a hot stomach. And if you jumped back too soon, the fire went out. It was a delicate art, and I got off just a little late. But after I had slapped out the smoldering off my sweater, we had a fire going, and before too long the lean-to was almost warm enough for everybody. After that, things got a lot easier as people warmed up and became useful again. We opened the tables out into the reflectors and covered them with tinfoil. As people got warm, we sent them out to gather wood. When it started to get dark, and most of the wood within easy reach had been gathered and burned, Rick and I took on the task of staying up all night and keeping the fire going. We went off into the snow a little further each time, following our own markings and bringing back the wood. Whenever the sweat we worked up getting the wood started to become a gate to the cold, we would get back to the fire and cook up again before we went out to get more. We watched the rolling whiteness build up until it looked like the woods was being flooded with white, slow-motion water. All the time we gathered wood, we looked up and watched the snow coming down and down, erasing the distant, dimming, and the close at hand. We watched the woods fill, and we laughed at the sleepers with their heads hidden in their sleeping bags, missing everything the storm was bringing us. The wind had picked up even as we were walking back, and before light, the snow had stopped falling. But the wind was blowing so strongly that it didn't matter. The woods filled faster and faster as the drifts collected passing flakes and set them to work catching others. As it got lighter, we could see the tail of the storm going over us and the winds scurrying along with it, stirring up the snow and reshaping it like an impatient artist working towards perfection. I watched the patterns form and unform as morning came up, hidden somewhere behind the clouds. The snow was blowing a steady hiss of dying flakes into the fire. We stoked it more and more as the wind began blowing the heat off and the flame tips. We got sweaty working so close to the fire, and our field trips had to be made shorter and shorter. The storm was gone, but it had left behind a picture of the motion of the woods as it had passed, with every curve of that motion outlined in the tops of the snowbanks. The woods were quiet, except for the chickadees, who seemed to be cheering in another storm or announcing that if they had survived another storm without cover, everyone under cover must surely have survived. They were, in a sense, the robins of winter announcing that rebirth is right around the corner. Rick and I looked forward to a full day of tracking as the animals came out of cover to feed themselves. The sun came out about 2 hours later, and just as it did, a huge army truck came around the bend and down into the clearing. A guy in fatigues jumped out of the passenger side and started waving his wool hat. "Are you people all right?" he yelled. "Yeah," we yelled back. "We're having a great time." The guy let his hand drop and cocked his head and asked us what we had said. "We're fine," we yelled. "We'll be back on Tuesday." The man shrugged and started getting back into the cab when the scoutmaster woke up and bolted out of the lean-to, shouting, "Don't listen to them! They're crazy! Get us the hell out of here!" So we did not get to track that part of the Pine Barrens until months later. But we got to go home and learn much about the search that had been carried out for us. The scoutmaster gave us a lot of credit, and we were minor heroes for a short time. But it was all so simple that Rick and I took more than ordinary 12-year-old pride in it. We stayed in the Boy Scouts for a while because we became resident experts on nature. But we found that after a while, we weren't learning anything new. There were no more winter campouts after that one, and we abandoned the Boy Scouts to spend our full time at our own exploration of the world. But it did not cease to amaze and worry me that those scouts would have died there through their own inaction if we had not told them the obvious. I resolved that when I eventually became a scoutmaster, my troop would be able to survive a blizzard with ease. What we had done had been easy for us, but it still told us how far we had come in relation to people who had not been trained, and that made us realize that we had finished our apprenticeship and were ready to expand and use our skills. The fact that our skills had helped somebody made us feel good, and we looked thereafter for people we could help. Well, the woods seemed full of people after that, and we were always finding people who had gone too far off a major trail or who had wandered in circles for hours or days. Later that summer, we passed a police car and a blue Ford on the shoulder of the road. on our way out of the woods. We were practicing our stalking, and we moved with a short burst of motion and slow cat-like movements of a close stalk. I came up silently behind the policeman and tapped him on the shoulder. He had his gun half drawn as he turned. After a few moments of cursing and a 10-minute lecture about sneaking up on people like that, we found that the people in the car had stopped for a roadside picnic and their 5-year-old had wandered away. I had seen his tracks a little way up the trail, and ordinarily I would have followed them, but Rick and I were on our way home and we were already late. The rescue squad people had pulled up in their white bread truck and started milling about, trying to get information, like ants bumping into one another. We said we could find him, and we showed them where the trail went. They started crashing into the brush around the trail and covering the prints. Rick and I made our first discovery. It is easier to find somebody by yourself than with a lot of people who don't know what they're doing getting in the way. The longer I have tracked lost people, the clearer that becomes. If I get in before the 500 searchers, the track is infinitely easier to follow, and quite often the longest part of the search is finding the first footprint out beyond where the searchers have gone. We got out in front of them as soon as we could and followed the trail. We moved a lot faster than they did, and we came upon the boys sitting by the stream about a mile away. It felt good to have helped somebody, and we liked being the center of attraction and having the rescue squad give us coffee out of the truck. But the trail was of no great interest to us in itself. A human being in the woods usually isn't as interesting as an animal. Most people churn up the landscape only slightly less than a bear. Later, I would come to far more ambiguous human trails and far more interesting ones. But until I had done a lot more tracking, the trail of a person in the woods was of no further interest to me once I had established their business there. But the trail of an animal could lead to days of information and observation. I was always amazed at the glint of absolute terror at being lost that I found in the eyes of so many of the lost people. Once, when I was hiking towards a camp in Lacey Track, I came across the same car tracks going down the same piece of road. Sometimes 2 or 3 times a couple of days apart. I was never extremely interested in car tracks, except that they told me about the flow of outsiders into the pines. But I kept wondering if there was something wrong, because the tracks went over each other so many times. It was summer, and a lot of people came in off the roads who would not normally have gone into the woods. I thought it might be someone who had come into the place once and then tried to find it again a couple of days later but couldn't. But there was something that didn't seem right about the trail, but I could not quite put my finger on it. I found out what was wrong when I came out of the woods near the bend and saw a man cooking a little piece of meat on a charcoal grill. There were a bunch of kids in the car crying and fighting, and his wife was crying even louder. I came up and asked him if I could help him. He looked at me as if he were not sure if I was real, and then started stammering out questions too fast to keep up with. I told him, yes, I did know how to get out. Yes, I would show him the way. He ran around to his wife's window and told her, what she had probably overheard anyway. The crying quieted down, and the man came back over and told me that they were vacationers from North Jersey. They had come to the shore for a week and had decided to go for a picnic on their way home. They had thought it would be fun to spend their last day in the pines. He said they had gotten off the main trail and gotten turned around in an endless tangle of roads that all looked alike until you'd been down them a few dozen times. They had spent almost a whole tank of gas trying to find their way out. He'd been parked where he was since the day before, when the gas tank had gotten too low to go any further without making it impossible to get out. They had been sitting there in their own fresh tracks, waiting unknowingly for a car to come down the road and save them. I didn't have the heart to tell them that they had been following their own freshly made tracks in circles the whole time. I could see their trail in my mind, charging in a straight line for a while, and then going in circles off of it for a longer time, and then going in a straight line again that curved into more circles. They could well have run out of gas and died wandering around on foot trying to get out. They had begun rationing their food the second day, and he had been cooking up the last of the meat. They were afraid to drink water except when they were desperate. They did a lot of things the right way, and they were lucky. 2 or 3 people a year were not. I told the man how to get out. He was only a twisting 1.5 miles from the main road, but he begged me literally to take him there instead of directing him because he was afraid he could get off the trail and never get back on it again. Naturally, I got in the car and drove out to the main road with them and saw them on their way. All the way out, they looked at the trees with abject terror. It was a concept I could not identify with. There were many times, especially in the beginning, when I did not know where I was in relation to where I had started out. But I was never lost. At least, I was not lost in a sense that I had someplace that I would not come back from unharmed. By the time we were going deep into the woods, Stalking Wolf had trained me so well that lost no longer meant anything. I could exist wherever I was in the Pine Barrens for as long as I needed to. I knew where food was. I knew where I could drink, and I had an infinite variety of things to watch. Everything I could want was immediately at hand. If I was lost, I seemed better off than a lot of people who weren't. I was always at home wherever I was. Only when I came out of the forest did I find out how easy it was to get lost. So thanks again for joining me this evening for the most recent chapter in the tracker, and I wanted to alert you to the fact that he is, Tom Brown Jr. is an amazing author and has quite a few other books. I don't even have all the things that he's written, but so this is The Quest, One Man's Search for Peace, Insight, and Healing in an Endangered World. Tom Brown's Guide to Wild, Edible, and Medicinal Plants. Now, because was based in New Jersey, the majority of the plants in this book will be like east of the Mississippi, although you may find some in other wetter areas around the planet. But so this is a good one, especially if you're interested in learning more about what's edible in your own backyard. And in all his books, he talks so much about the sacred and about having gratitude and not taking things for granted and having respect for our Creator who made all of this. Then there's a field guide to nature observation and tracking. And so this is, if you're enjoying the book I'm reading right now, this one will probably be the one that you would most enjoy getting and reading on your own. A field guide to the forgotten wilderness. Now this is for those of y'all who are not in the wilds, but you're in suburbia somewhere, and this book will be really great to help you discover all the life around you that you might be missing because you're thinking, well, I'm in a city or whatever. And finally, this one, Living with the Earth, and he's got skills. This is a skill book, so if you remember some of my videos about tanning the deer hides and stuff, there's chapters in here about things like that. So anyway, just wanted to make y'all aware that he's got some other books. In fact, just inside the front cover, you can see, so there's the tracker, the search, the vision, the quest, the journey, grandfather, awakening spirits, the way of the scout, and science and art of tracking. And that's even beyond the ones that I just showed you here on my countertop. So again, thanks for joining me this evening. I hope you will do a little research if this story is enjoyable to you, to maybe go out and get some of Tom's books. All right, see you next week at 8 p.m. Mountain Time. All right, till then.